Hey everyone, I am Jordan Garcia, and this is the Twitter's Hidden Gems podcast, the show where we interview, highlight, and get to know small creators on Twitter. The goal is simple. We'd like these largely undiscovered people who are incredible at what they do to move from hidden gems to discovered gems. We'll hear about their backstories, their failures, successes, and journey to make their side projects their main source of income. And who knows, we may look back a year from now only to realize that we got to interview the now widely successful content creator when they were just starting. Let's get into the interview. Hey, Riley, thanks for joining the Twitter's Hidden Gems podcast. It's great to have you, man. Can you tell us where you're joining from and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hey, Jordan. Yeah, thanks so much for having me on. Riley McGhee, I am calling in from today, Hudson Valley, New York. I'm trying to remember. I think I'm just an hour ahead of you. I think
just an
right.
hour.
And a bit about myself. Where do you start? I've been a counselor. And now work as a coach. I've done consulting. So professionally, I feel like we could probably cover a lot of ground there, but I'll leave it at that. And I think I'm probably first and foremost, I'm a people person. I love connecting with people. You were one of those people not too long ago,
Right.
when we first connected. And I think we were just talking before, like this conversation could go in so many different directions. So we're going to try to be conscious of that. But also a husband and, son, friend, not parent yet, unless you count our German Shepherd. And man, they so much hair. But that's me in a nutshell.
Dude, I know this is not the point of the podcast episode, but I have a golden retriever and I have a collie mix, and I am trying to figure out how to contain the hair in our house. It is everywhere. And we have to vacuum 2 to 3 times a week. It's in our carpet. It gets into our air filter system. It's everywhere. So first question, do you have any tips on how to combat dog hair permeating the entire house?
Well, number one is definitely vacuuming a lot, but there's this thing, I can't remember what it's called. There's just this little brush thing that I found online, probably on Instagram, and it for upholstery and clothes or your couch, it just takes it, or even a rug or carpet, it takes it right off, which is super cool. So you look for some kind of comb-ish looking tool like that. But I'm right there with you. I've been thinking about those what are Roombas or things like that, because I feel like just to keep up with it, I don't even want to think about how much it would just pick up on a regular basis, because man, those double coats, they add up.
Yeah, I'm also considering a robot vacuum as well, but what I can't get over is the price tag associated with them.
Yeah.
If you want a good one, it's going to be $400 to $600, and I'm thinking, gosh, man, do I really want to pay that much money just to stop having hair? Having to manually vacuum hair every couple of days, but it's bad. It is really bad. I love my dogs, but dude, everywhere. It makes having company more difficult, because you have to make sure that all your couches and your rugs are clean before people come over. At least we do. So anyhow, I know that's not why we're here today. So you mentioned you've been a counselor, a coach, you've been involved in consulting. One thing I'd love to get into with you is what led to the diversity of roles that you've occupied. Did you come into the workforce or your career thinking, man, I just want to touch a bunch of different things? Or did you start in one place and it naturally evolved into going into other areas?
Yeah, I'm going to try to keep that answer short if possible, because that could be the whole episode. I'm an advisor, or on the advisory board for an operations community. And we talk about in that community quite often that no one ever grows up thinking I want to be in operations someday. And all I really know is when I was a kid, I was always the advice guy, the advice friend. And I was like, oh, well, when I found out there's professions related to that, I was like, I could get paid for that. So that took me into psychology. Then I discovered sports psychology, and that's actually my initial background. is sport and performance psychology. The degree is actually in counseling. It's counseling based. I could have stayed on a bit longer to be a licensed therapist, but I didn't want to go the clinical route.
Yeah.
And I always had this kind of entrepreneurial itch. And so I wanted to start my own business. After my master's degree, I did that. Realized that it was really hard to start a business. Fortunately, I won some contracting work, and I was working as a performance coach, blending some of those skills. And I did coach like actual sports before that as well, like track and field. And I got to work as a performance coach. I worked alongside former Olympians, and I got to work with surgeons and sales directors and pretty much any high pressure, high performance job. That was really cool, but still struggled building the business. And then I saw this talk called "What They Don't Tell You About Entrepreneurship," and it really clicked with me. And so I reached out to the speaker, the TEDx speaker. And long story short, he became my first operations consulting client. I didn't know what operations was at the time, but it was all the things that I had learned, kind of the back end, building a website, the infrastructure, email marketing, CRM system, like all the back end stuff. And that led to another client. Before I knew it, that was my second business, operations consulting. And one of those clients hired me full time to be the chief operating officer and I'm actually just getting out of that this past 2.5 years about. And so I'm business number 3. I'm back into coaching and consulting. So I've been across that whole spectrum, and just kind of one thing, sort of led into the next. Yeah. So it's been a wild ride.
That's a cool background. It's not often I connect with people, and you and I've connected before. So to be fair, you and I've had a few chats before, but I'm interested in the fact that like those things came up. You found a TEDx speech or a talk that you liked. How did you find the contact details for the speaker, and how did you connect with him?
Oh, that's a good question. So I kind of think of myself as like a super sleuther. I don't know if that's like the right term or not, but I specifically remember a teacher in high school who, she must have been like a poor woman. She was like her first year as a student, or as a teacher, and we were all like, so like we're a few years apart in age, and we all gave her such a hard time. Found out she was like dating someone that was the older brother of someone in our like class, and so like there was some connections there. And I was like, I'm sure we could find you online. She's like, you're not gonna find me. Like, I've got a different name and blah. So I took it as like a challenge, and me and a couple buddies like looked through all the different connections and wound up finding her. And I don't know what we accomplished doing that, but I think between that and just, I don't know, I guess just the millennial generation, I guess I'm a part of that. I just feel like you can Google things, and that's kind of what I did. I just sort of went down the rabbit hole of different combinations of looking for this guy's contact information. I probably found like 3 different email addresses, and typically the more public someone is, the easier they are to find until they become too public. So like the Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerbergs, like those kinds of like, then they start to pull that stuff back. But yeah, there's like this little sweet spot where people are pretty easy to find. And one of those emails, I don't know if he got all of them, but he got one of them, and he happened to respond and actually gave me advice on how I could better reach out to people, which I then immediately implemented in my follow-up email. And I don't know, seemed to click. I think he liked the initiative, and I did some work for him for free initially before he became a paid client.
That's awesome. So you took the time, you found his information, essentially cold DM'd him.
Yeah.
Cold emailed him a few times, and one of those finally resonated. It clicked. Then did you ask to jump on a call, or did y'all just keep exchanging emails?
I think if I remember right, it's been a while since I recollected this. I think I only sent one email, which is not usually the case. I've done cold emailing before, and that's not usually how it goes. But like the same email to the different email addresses. A few days later, he responded. I replied, like I said, and probably a little bit of email exchange before. I was just trying to figure out how I could help him, because what he was doing at the time really resonated with me. I just wanted to be, just absorb and be involved. And that's why I was willing to just, help out for free however I could. And I think he was the one that even suggested first that why don't we just get on a call and see where it goes. I think when someone messages you and you've never had a chance to, it's much easier to feel someone out when you can actually
Yeah.
have some FaceTime. So that's what we did. Clicked, connected, and started off with a little project. I think it was just like social media related, which is not my skill set. Actually, I think part of the reason that I maybe qualify for this podcast is Twitter's Hidden Gems. I hadn't touched Twitter. I actually thought Twitter was a fad when it first came out,
I did too.
whenever that was 10 plus years ago now. And so I didn't get one for years. I actually had a friend sign me up, and it was just kind of dormant. I use it for like sports news, stuff like that. And it wasn't until pretty recent that I actually jumped in myself. But yeah, going back to that contact, I think I just created like some promo and different social media posts for. I think it was his 100th podcast episode. He was having a big event at the time, and he could use some
Wow.
promo for that. So I was like, "Well, here's how I could help," and that was just the first thing.
Yeah. I'm not digging for the sake of digging. I'm curious because I think listeners, myself included, we've probably all had someone in mind that we wanted to connect with, someone that we looked up to, a potential mentor, someone where we saw their TED talk or their article, their video, and I'm wondering what you did that could be repeated for someone else that could work to help them get in front of someone they really admire or respect. So I'll end on that question. Any thoughts on, or do you have any tips on how someone could get in front of a mentor or someone they respect the way you were able to do, you were able to accomplish that?
Yeah, for sure. I only know what's worked for me, and I've only done it enough to the point that it got me to the next thing or the next thing. And there's probably a ton of different approaches, but the one that's always worked really well for me is I'm just a really naturally curious person. I've been like the question guy anywhere I go,
Yeah.
so I just leverage that. So I think about what are the things I'm genuinely curious about, and it also depends on your positioning. So when I was younger, it was even easier to take this approach. I think as I get older, there's a bit more nuance to it, but I'll just start with assuming that you are just starting out. So it's not even necessarily an age thing, but like a where you are in your journey. Like if you are brand new to a space, then you can play the ignorance card and be like, I don't know anything. I would love to learn from you. How is that possible? Um, and honestly, like as long as someone actually has the time, that's the thing. So if you go back to like the Zuckerbergs, or I don't know, we can just insert any name in there, but the celebrity status person just to me it's an uphill battle. Like there's so much crammed into that person's calendar. Getting
Right.
a slot in there is going to be really difficult. I don't actually believe that it's impossible, but for me it's always, I don't think it's worth the time, because you'd have to connect. So a couple different approaches that you could apply to this level is just going to take you longer, is looking at like, all right, so if this is my target, like what's the second degree, third degree for, like who can I, and that's sort of the super sleuthing approach, is like who is related that I can connect me, because you're going to be connected to someone, the 6 degrees of separation, I think is what it
Yeah.
is. So that's kind of one approach, and you just connect your way, just kind of network your way there. The other is that curiosity angle, which is just the direct, like, hey, can I pick your brain? Um, if someone's too busy, then you have to start with some sort of value, which is why, and that was actually Mark is his name. That was Mark's advice to me back then, was take the time to try to see like what they're actually doing. Like, and that involves more research, but you have a better conversion rate if you know what they're trying to accomplish, because then you can help them accomplish it. And if you can provide a little bit of value on the front end, they're more likely to respond or engage and give you some time. And that there's probably a lot of different versions of that, but I think in general, try to see what value you can give to them. And for someone just starting out, um, if that person is who you're reaching out to and you just want to know their experience so far, people like to talk about themselves. Like
Right.
that could be value in and of itself. So if you're giving them a platform to speak on, even if it's just a one-to-one private conversation, like they might feel good about giving back to someone who's a little bit further behind them. So
Yeah.
there's lots of layers to it, but I think that kind of covers all the bases, like in a general sense.
Right. So to recap, I know you love the recaps.
Yeah.
Find someone that's actually targetable, someone that you can more than likely have success reaching out to. You're probably not going to get Beyonce on a call if you wanted to get Beyonce on a phone call. It'd be very difficult unless you're some credentialed reporter, I would assume. So maybe there's a sweet middle ground where you can find someone who is not as popular as a Beyonce, as a president, so on and so forth, but someone that has influence, they have leadership, they have experience in something that you're interested in, and then you remain curious, you network, and then when you reach out with value first. Try to do something that shows that you've done your homework, and if you can solve any of their problems with the value that you're providing, that may go further. Did I recap that well, or did I miss anything?
No, I think I actually have just to add two more quick things to it. I think bold and authentic are like the words I would add in there. Bold is just be direct and just ask. And that bleeds into authentic, because if you're trying to like cover some sneaky ask up, then like people kind of feel that, and it's not. So to me, like um, for a tactical thing is, if someone has a million followers on Instagram, but 100 followers on Twitter, they're going to be easier to talk to on Twitter.
Yeah.
Like it's a less crowded space. So pick your channel appropriately. Email can be, but you can't see that there's a wall with email. You can't see how many emails are in their inbox, but so that one you kind of have to go in blind. But yeah, so to me, just asking and like paying attention to like, where can I talk? Like, do you have the space to talk? And if not, like, what's the value I can provide to you? But if you can answer that question ahead of time, even better. So that's the bold piece. And then that goes into the authenticity, like just be a real person.
Right.
I just think in general that tends to help.
Oh yeah, that's great advice. Anytime I get a message where I feel like it's slimy, I don't respond. It turns me off immediately. Anytime I feel there's ulterior motives in the slightest, I would have I would have preferred that someone come into my inbox and say, "Hey, here's why I'm reaching out. Here's what I wanted to do. Are you down?" Rather than veil it with this, "Hey, I'm really interested in all the great things you're doing. I'd love to." Anyhow, I could recap all the terrible DMs that we probably get in our emails or our Twitter inboxes. But yeah, I'll move on from that. I want to take a step back a little bit. So you've told us a little bit about yourself, how you got into what you've done so far in your career, the various hats that you've worn. But I want to go more. I want to zoom out and ask about you for a second. What's been on your mind the heaviest lately? Whether good or bad, what have you been thinking about the most lately?
Candidly, I haven't shared. So I've been building a course, and it's my first time launching this course. And so always, I battle perfectionism
Hmm.
quite frequently. And it's something I've gotten much better with over the years. But at the same time, I desperately want to provide value to people. And
Yeah.
that's part of, to me, the boldness piece as well, is like ask people for feedback. Like, did this land for you? Did it work? And I think that's part of why like I like to recap so often is I want to know what I'm saying. Did it resonate, or what are you taking away? And like there's a million ways I can ask that question. And so I'm thinking about how many more things can I pack into this course before it launches, to make sure I give as much value as possible. So that's where my head's been at lately, amidst many other things, but is thinking about that because it's about to
Yeah.
come up.
Well, we can't hear about a course you're creating and not dig into it a little bit. So tell us about the course you're creating and what the course aims to accomplish, to achieve, to help others achieve themselves.
Yeah, so the first iteration is a live course, and I have only opened up 12 spots for it. It's filling up. It's not quite full yet, but I don't know when this episode will be released, so it might not be available at that time. But um, I think it's a bit meta. I'm trying to think of the best starting point here, because when I was transitioning out of my COO role, rather than just dive headfirst back into coaching consulting like I did before, I wanted to kind of get a feel for the people that I really cared about, which were the solopreneurs, small business owners. Like those are people I really resonate with because I have been one.
Sure.
And so I just did a ton of market research. I spoke with over 30 individuals in like a 6-ish to 8 week span. And I mean, like 30 to 60 minute conversations, like legit, like I wasn't just like 10 minutes on off.
Yeah.
Um, and getting in deep and understanding like who they were and what their goals were and what their business is about, or if they haven't started a business, like what are they thinking about, and just unpacking all of that. Um, Maybe not surprisingly, 80 to 90% of the feedback I got, like the different problems people were facing and challenges, relate in some way, shape, or form to sales or marketing.
Hmm.
And in my mind, I think that that's just getting traction. It's like step one, like let's get some momentum. And I've never claimed to be a sales or marketing expert, but I'm moving on to business number 3. I've worked with dozens of entrepreneurs and small businesses and done consulting. And so I've seen a lot of what works and what doesn't. And I know what works well for me. And so it kind of connects to what we were just talking about, actually, which is like that networking piece. Um, so I noticed there were people that had, no traffic, they were just starting and they need sales. Like you don't have a business if you don't have any sales. So you need
Right.
revenue in. Some monetization, number one. Number two, there were people even before that don't even know, they're still kind of second guessing their niche. They don't know exactly what their offer should be, and they're just kind of stuck in their head. There are
Hmm.
also people a little bit after that maybe even have traffic. They have an offer, they have traffic, but they're not converting anything into sales. And to me, all of these things, all these different pain points are all solved by starting in the same place, which is like market research, building connections, have the market tell you what they want, see if you can give them that, and then come back and give them that. And that's the basic premise of the course, is taking that sort of approach, boiling it down into different steps, um, plus the system that I built for myself, which is basically a no code CRM system, because that's another gap, was people can't stay organized and they're thinking about systems and all these complicated tools, and that's something I've helped a lot of entrepreneurs with. And there's just this big delta between uh, the free stuff that you know about versus like the Salesforce, HubSpot, and like the pay. It
Right.
gets so expensive so quick, and there's so many features that you don't need. And so I was like, here's the things I know are really useful. Here's the features you should pay attention to, and I just put them in my own version, and you can copy it for free. And that's, well, for free. It's part of the course, I should say.
Right.
Um, and yeah, that's the course, is to go through that, use the system, and like figure out the right steps in what order to be able to clarify your niche, your offer, and actually get validation from the market. The way I think about it is all the coaching and values work and like the thing, like what are your interests, and all that is like the top down approach. Super important. You have to have a compass to like know which direction you're even headed in.
Right.
But imagine if someone threw you in the woods with a compass and that was it. You had like no path or markers or like anything. You need something to tell you that you're still on the right path, even if you know,
Yeah.
like, well, I'm headed north. But it's like you're never going to get to where you're going unless you get what I call the bottom up approach, which is market validation, and that's essentially what product market fit is.
Yeah.
I'll pause there because I'm starting to use a lot of jargon.
No, no, no. It's really good because I think a lot of what you're solving, the problem that you're helping people work through, is the common approach that new business owners take. And that is they think about the product they want to deliver to the market. And they start with this idea of, okay, I'm good at this. I can build a product. I'm going to send it out to the market and see what happens. What ends up happening, more likely than not, is their product isn't received by the market the way they hoped. And what you're doing is inverting the process and saying, instead of guessing, instead of starting by just building something and sending it out there, why don't you see what the market actually wants, conduct effective market research, listen to the pain points that people have, and then once you gather all that information, build your product with all that information in mind, which would most likely lead to a more effective product launch, data would show, right?
Yeah, that's a big piece of it. It's both. It's like if you don't have an idea or a dream or a goal, then like I don't know how motivated you're going to be to even start. But then at the same time, yes, you need to actually like that's all the. And the thing is a lot of it's just it's part of the framework I'm what I'm calling in my course is like the authentic outreach framework, which is like and that's a big part of it. It's like you need to make connections, and you've already made a lot of connections, and a lot of the people that have already signed up for the course that I'm speaking to are coaches and kind of the coach creator consultant sort of space, and a lot of those people already have these skills. It's just you're not
Hmm.
applying them. And a lot of times people feel salesy, or they're like, I need a massive audience, or I need some complicated funnel. And you just don't need those things. And most people, when they actually like have a sale or sales call, it's just like this anyway. Like it's a one-to-one conversation.
Right.
So if that's what you're doing, you don't need to worry about like scalability and having like a massive or setting up an ad campaign. I mean, and because there's a million different, I've explored, I think there's like 25 or 26 different like distribution channels. So there's not a million, but there's a bunch of different ways that you can reach people.
Yeah.
And I kind of find that the unscalable stuff is, it's kind of like, if you, have you ever driven a manual, like stick shift, Jordan?
Only in video game form, not in real
Okay.
life.
Well, you probably can imagine, at least from a video game, like if you are at a dead stop, or like you're just even crawling and you try to jump straight into like fifth gear, the car is like gonna not be happy with you.
Right.
But like first gear, you're gonna accelerate really quickly. First gear, though, you have to move out of eventually because it's not scalable. Like you can't hit top speed in first gear
Right.
forever. Most of the people I talk to, though, don't even like don't realize what actually comes along with, because I've seen it. I've been in the companies where you start to scale and there's more pressure and more, you know, chaos. Like just complexity just seems to seep in like as you expand and grow. And so I think people kind of have this grass is greener attitude with like what that actually looks like. And leadership and management, you start to move into a whole different world of problems and things. And some people really actually want to do that. But a lot of people I talk to, like they just want the lifestyle they want. They just want to make X amount of money, spend more time with friends or family, or be location independent. Like there's some really basic things you can check off that you don't need to get into fifth gear. You could stay in second gear forever and be
Mm.
perfectly fine and happy, and you can avoid all of the complicated stuff that comes along with third gear and fourth gear and fifth gear, and
Yeah.
then VCs and fundraising, and like it's a different world. And I think people don't necessarily know the full picture. And
Mm.
so like it starts with like, A, be honest with yourself and like ask some of these questions, and B, like just start. Just like you got to go through first gear anyway. So like let's
Yeah.
just start in first gear.
Yeah. I love the just start advice. You mentioned earlier, maybe when you and I connected before the call, that perfectionism is something that you've had to work through. I'm
Yeah.
also a active recovering perfectionist myself. Even starting this podcast was fighting all the natural perfectionist tendencies that I have. My brain was telling me, you've never done this before. You don't have the most expensive microphone. You don't know how to create this or that, or who's going to make the thumbnails and all the art. And I figured it out, and my entire approach to this, and you and I have both clicked on this same thought of just like done is better than perfect. Done is better than great. And I know you have that on the background of your phone. You shared that
Yeah.
with me before.
Yeah. You might even still be able to see it.
Yeah,
If
done
for
is better
video.
than
Yeah.
good.
Yep.
And I love that, because what's helped me combat perfectionism more effectively than anything else is just doing something and completing it, and fully leaning into the fact that this may be my first gear and I'm not going fast. And it's probably not even pretty how I'm accelerating or how my car is driving right now, but I'm at least in first gear. And I could never get to second or third if I never got it into first, or never pulled the car out of park and put it in drive to begin with. I love this analogy, by the way, so I'm going to keep going on it. But I love what you're about. You mentioned also that like authenticity is at the heart of a lot of what you embody when you talk to people, making genuine connections. You said you don't have a background in sales, but you've always had success with making authentic connections with others and allowing things to organically happen from that. That's how you and I connected. You reached out to me via Twitter. It never felt slimy. It never felt like you had an ulterior motive. It felt like you just wanted to connect. And that is a really great skill to have. And I wanted to ask you, how did you learn that? Did authenticity come naturally to you? Or did you make an adjustment in some chapter of your life where you're like, man, I'm going to change the way I approach people and connections?
That's a big question. I I think it's kind of all the above. So there's a few different. I mean, just to be fair, like I I I still struggle to, like, I don't want to toot my own horn, but I do
Do it.
believe that I have a skill set, and I've been told many times that it's extremely rare because I've been there's a class I took in grad school, IO psychology. It's an industrial organizational psychology. It's part of that program. One path I almost went down but didn't. And in that, we learned about consulting and the spectrum, and what they called the spectrum was um, consulting on one end, coaching in the middle, and counseling or like therapy on the other end. But counseling, you can call it the three C's. So the differences that they pointed out in that sort of the kind of framework is in within the approach that you use. And so in coaching, and there are so many different versions of this word, and a lot of my clients have been in the UK, and I think their version of coaching is a bit different than the American version of coaching. I think the American version is a bit more on the consulting end, whereas the English version is a bit more traditional, in air quotes here, in the sense that it's a bit more kind of on the counseling end. And so, like, raw traditional coaching is supposed to be kind of client led, and you're just going to kind of guide them through their own stuff. But that sounds a lot more like counseling. Consulting, you're going to just come in and tell them what they should do, and that's it. And so
Ah,
it's like kind of like less emotional. The reality is, and something I learned in my master's program, you're always talking to a human, and like
mhm,
humans are emotional creatures, and that's something I have to remind myself of as well, that I have
right.
emotions to begin with. That's also one of, I think, to answer your question, one of the superpowers that I had, I think, coming out of my childhood, for probably a host of different reasons, but of kind of detaching the emotional piece from the logic. And so I can look at either or both and together. Um, and even better, I can do that for other people, because when you try to look at it for yourself, it's just more difficult. It's kind of messier, like the forest through the trees analogy.
Yeah.
Um, Versus, yeah, the objectivity is something that I've been honing for decades. First as a friend, and I think I just built empathy that way. Between my friends and family and just kind of my upbringing, I think I had that advantage. But then also going into a psychology degree and then having literally a master's in counseling psychology, obviously I learned a lot about rapport building and even like body language. We would film ourselves counseling other people. I remember a professor like noting my hand placement on the edge of a sofa and like how relaxed I was to like help the other person. Like, just there's so much like detail that can go into it. Um, so I can't expect everyone to have the exact same path, but I think there's lots of things that you can pick up just from observation and from practice. And I think it's also really useful. And this is something that I know I've like always need to work on as well. Uh, because I'm like a busybody and I'm always like do and work ethic, and maybe we can touch on like the finance stuff as well. Because I think I was like raised with a scarcity mindset when it comes
Sure.
to money and things like that. But observing isn't just observing others. I think it's also carving out the space to observe yourself. And
Mm,
so essentially that's reflection, right? And I think
yeah.
if you're honest with yourself and reflect on the things you did, and you look at the results and say, well, what worked and what didn't? Do I feel like we had a connection? Did that person feel like we had a connection? Did they feel heard? I think there's a lot of different like pieces we could touch on, but just rapport building in general, I think, is a massive skill set for any industry, because every industry has people in it.
Oh, yeah. There's a lot of powerful nuggets you mentioned there. One I wanted to focus on is, like, we're all humans, and like at the end of the day, we are emotional creatures. And I think we as what I've noticed is when I meet smart people, they assume more often than not that their decisions and what they're doing is purely a logical, it's coming from a logical place only. And I think we can overlook how impactful emotions are in our decision making processes. For instance, I love, like you mentioned, finance earlier. Obviously, that's something I'm passionate about. Have you ever been in a store, or you've ever been somewhere where you were looking to make a purchase and it made all the sense in the world on paper, but something in your gut said, I just don't feel good about this purchase? Like, I know this is on sale. I know I have the money for it, but maybe I'm just getting this gut feeling like this is not the best purchase. Has that ever happened to you? Because I'm saying that because it's happened to me before, and I may be killing my own analogy, but has that ever happened to you? Does that make any sense where something could make sense on paper, but you could get a gut feeling that deters you from making the purchase entirely?
I feel like I'd like you to expand on that more because my initial uh reaction is that it's the opposite for me. I would have
Really?
like I'd have a gut response to like, oh, this thing's cool, or I like this thing, and then immediately I squash it with logic. I'm like, I don't need that. Like, is it? I'm really clear in my head going into the money stuff. I have been a super frugal person for a very long time. I know you're familiar with Dave Ramsey and like
Oh, yeah.
his principles, and I think he has something called like the envelope
Hmm.
method. I had never heard of that before. I just had a family friend tell me when I was working my way through college in a restaurant. I got paid in cash. I just I didn't have anywhere else to put it. So I took envelopes and I stuffed them. I labeled the envelope like this is for savings, this is for rent, this is
Yeah.
for student loans. And I just put cash into each one. And I think for me, I have a really clear understanding around like what's a need versus
Hmm.
what's a want versus what's like an impulse buy. And so I don't know if that resonates, but like for me, it almost feels like it's the other way around.
Yeah, that makes sense. And of course, me bringing that up isn't going to apply to everybody, but one, this is again going to overgeneralize. I'm painting with a broad brush here. There's two generalizations that typically happen with spending. Sometimes a man is going to embody the logical, hey, this makes sense on paper. I want to make this purchase. The interest rate is probably where I want it, whatever, whatever, whatever. I've heard from someone that has a very successful marriage once, and they said, anytime you're making a major decision, obviously it goes without saying you want to talk to your wife, but like and vice versa. Like husband and wife communicate very well, ask each other for what you think about any major decision. But this person was telling me that when it comes to making like a major purchase decision, or let's say it's a business partnership, I wanted to get in partnership with someone else. This person was recommending, hey, talk to your wife because she's going to have some intuitive feelings about this that you may be overlooking, that you may be missing because you're so fixated on the numbers, on the potential growth, on this person's expertise, that you're missing out on all the subtle cues that maybe your wife is picking up on because she has, again, generally speaking, women are known to have a stronger intuition about things. So what could happen is you go home, you're talking to your wife, it makes all the sense in the world on paper, and then she says, babe, I just have this gut feeling that this person's not who you think they are, and I don't think you should go into this partnership with them. And I've heard of stories of this happening where the
Yeah.
man disregards his wife's advice, enters in a partnership, and it crashes and burns. I've also heard where someone who obviously respects their wife says, you know what, babe, I trust your judgment. I won't enter into this partnership. I can't explain why, but I trust your emotional intuition here. And they made the decision, and it ended up being the right one. They avoided a disaster. So that's a hyperbolic, that's a very like intense example of it. But where I wanted to go with all of it is I do think that we are emotional in our decision making, and even the most robotic of minds that I know still bring in emotions into their decisions, even if what their decisions are give them emotional peace. For instance, the envelope system that you were using, there was probably emotional peace that you derived from knowing where every dollar was going, from having that control of, okay, once this envelope is out of money, I no longer spend. There's emotions that are tied to it. And again, I'm not trying to make this apply to everybody, but I wanted to, going back to what I was saying, is just I think we can overestimate at times how logical we are and underestimate how emotions play a role or a factor into what we do. But if you have any thoughts that are to the contrary, I'm more than willing to hear them.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. It almost feels like the lay like the size of the decision changes the way that I think about it. Because if it's something that's, I don't know, buying a candy bar at a grocery store, I look at that. I'm like, you know, did I earn this in terms of calories? Like, does it meet my
Right.
fitness, wellness goals? Like, it starts to go into the, and like, or emotionally, do I feel like I need it? Like, to me, I don't need to involve my wife in that kind of a decision. But
Right.
I
Of
think
course.
some of the bigger sort of life altering decisions, there's definitely, I think that's where I start to swing back into I include the emotional piece into it. And then obviously I think when you're, I shouldn't say obviously, but I think for most people in a happy marriage, going over those decisions together, one thing, like kind of a guideline, a rule that I've heard that I like is, if it's not a yes for both parties, then you don't move forward.
It's
Uh,
a great rule.
and there's a ton of nuance there, but generally speaking, I like to use that as a rule of thumb. But when it comes to actually, I'd love to share, kind of the, like, going into the finance piece, and we could kind of circle back and bring this back to business
Yeah.
in a way as well. Because I know, man, we could talk about this stuff for hours, I'm sure. But when it comes to the personal finance stuff, like, I stumbled across the the FIRE community. I don't even know how
Hmm.
many years ago. Financially independent, retire early, and I had already been doing a lot of those principles. In fact, when I was in college, I remember doing all the math to sort of figure out, if I wanted to live off interest alone, how much money would I need saved up to never actually to be able to retire at an early age and never have to work again, and blah blah blah. And I remember explaining this to a girl I was dating at the time, and she was like, "Well, why would you want to wait like half your life to start living it?" Because for me, I'd figured out that, well, if I make this much money by this age and I work for 20 something years, then by age 50 or 49, whatever it was, I could retire, and like, and it's super achievable for a lot of people. Like, you don't have to make, you know, you don't even have to technically make six figures, although, that inflation, like, everything changes. But
Of course.
it, when she said that, it just really changed the way I started looking at, like, you don't want to wait half your life to live your life. And then a few years ago, my dad passed away unexpectedly, and that really hammered it home. Where it's
Yeah.
just like, he was 56, so
Gosh.
it was completely out of the blue, and feels, maybe not as a kid. When you're a kid, you look at that, you're like, that's old. But as you get older, you realize that's pretty young. And
Yeah.
so I think it makes me think of financial freedom a bit differently. And when I've had this conversation with people, a lot of times when you think about financial freedom, you think about, it's the ability to never have to work again, and it's the
Hmm.
ability to retire, quote unquote. But I realized that, the reason I wanted financial freedom, wasn't to sit on a beach and like sip pina coladas or whatever cocktail of your choice for the rest of my life. I wanted to be able to help more people, and like spend more time with friends and family. And by help more people, I mean, like, in the ways that we talked about before, like with business and coaching and consulting and investing. Even there's a show on, or used to be on, I don't know if it's still on, called The Profit,
Hmm.
um, which is kind of like someone goes in, invests, and saves a business, or turns it around. And I always thought, like, that is my dream job. I would love to do that. So I
Yeah.
just need to learn about business first, and also I need enough money that I can invest in a business. And I always thought I need to have, so much wealth to be able to, like, I would love to be able to invest in a business, receive no compensation up front. And that way the person knows that we're 100% aligned, and I only win if they win. Like, we're on the same team, and
Right.
not just emotionally, like, we agree, or even values alignment, but like on paper, like, I can back it up with math. Like, we're on the same side. And when I looked closer at that, I realized, number one, I can do some of those things now. Like, I don't have to have all the money in the world to start doing like some of the
Right.
things on my list. And so that shift for me was, it's not freedom from having to work. It is freedom to fill in the blank, like whatever it is for you. And
Yeah.
so for me, then it was freedom to do those things. Once I realized that I can get clearer on what is actually on my list, And then once I have clarity on that list, you might realize, like I did, that some of those things you can already start doing. And so I did.
Yeah.
And that's kind of further, strengthened my drive to do more business coaching and consulting and the operations work I was doing. And um, I think that people can be closer to freedom than they realize. It's just you have to go through you have to put in the reps, you have to actually think about it, and then you have to bring that like big amorphous like crazy dream down to reality and actually like figure out how to execute on it.
Yeah. That's a great segue because you've branded yourself on LinkedIn, on Twitter as the clarity coach. I love that, by the way. I've had a call with you where you've helped me take ideas that I have and you've helped me by developing a plan of action. And you've said, hey, you want to get here. Here are some actionable steps that you can take to do that. So you've been a great bridge from my perspective of someone that can help take an idea and identify actionable steps to make it a reality. That's something you do really well. That's a skill set you've carved out for yourself. And so in your work, what have you seen as one of the largest roadblocks or hangups that people stumble over when trying to bridge their ideas into a reality?
Yeah, I think there's two directions. I've worked with and I've seen one pop up more than the other. The the one I don't see is as often is probably in reality what actually happens more often, which is why I don't see them, is the people that never even get started because they get so lost in the weeds. They're and by the that's a restaurant term. They get so still in
No,
me.
I know
Yeah.
what you mean, though.
Yeah, you get so caught up in the nitty gritty detail, the like you're saying, the thumbnail and the domain name and the what's your brand and logo and like all the things that just like you feel like when you order your first stack of business cards, you're like, now I'm in business. It's like that doesn't mean shit.
Right.
You didn't do anything other than pay someone for some pieces of paper with a name on it. Like no one knows that you exist.
Yeah.
That is not if there's one takeaway from this episode, I hope it is that you don't need a business card to start your business. And that is also not what counts as starting a business. There's so many other things you can do for free that will get you further. Anyway, that's like a pet peeve of mine.
Yeah.
And that was something I did too. Like, I don't know how many hundreds of business cards I've never used that I have in some cabinet somewhere.
Vistaprint, man, they make a
Yeah.
ton of money on dreams that never turn into reality.
Yes. So that is one direction, is like you never actually take you think you're taking the first step, but then you're just like, really what you're doing is you're taking more and more steps on the hamster wheel. You're not actually pushing forward. So that's one big roadblock. The other is the complete opposite direction. And these are a lot of the entrepreneurs I've worked with because they have started, they have gotten momentum, they've made some progress, but then they lean too far in the visionary direction. And and this is where I got my start in operations consulting. An analogy that I've used with a founder I worked with quite often, we laugh about it still, is I remember the very first call. So imagine I'm like a year-ish into business. It's not my first client, but it's my first call with this client. We go through our conversation like halfway through, and I think in analogies, and like I was like, founder, I think you kind of seem like a dog, like just digging like under a fence, and you just want someone to help like clean up the pile of dirt behind the
It's
mess
a
that
great
you're making.
analogy.
And it felt a little bold at the time, but like we've used it so many times since. And that I think is it's almost, you could almost sum it up with like, I would just call it like visionary like ADD. It's like, oh, but this idea, or shiny object syndrome. I think
Yeah.
that is another one where it's like, it's great to have ideas, but at the same time, ideas are a dime a dozen. So many people have ideas. And if you can't pick one and focus on it long enough, again, pivot, evolve, totally fine. That's natural and normal. But if you're just on to the next one, on to the next one, on to the next one, that's a different version of the same hamster wheel. You're never going to move forward and actually make progress. So either end is a hamster wheel, and it's like you can move an inch forward in 1,000 different directions, or you can take all those inches and add them up and go in one direction and actually make progress. And then that's actually what real life looks like. There's this book called Dark Horse. I can't remember the subtitle, but it's by Todd Rose and Ogi Ogas, something like that. And cool book, but I specifically remember one picture that came to mind reading it, which is some like math model matrix. I can't remember what it's called, but the vision is, imagine you're in the mountains and you can't see all of the peaks, but you see one in front of you.
Mm-hmm.
So you hike up to the first one, and from there you can see the next peak. And so you climb down, and then you go to the next peak, and you just keep repeating this process. And that's why people have squiggly career paths. That's why like successful people have all these zigzag, like no one goes in a straight line because you can't see that far ahead. And if you try to, like you're actually on a hamster wheel. You're not actually moving forward. And so to me, the balance between both of those hamster wheels is that like look at the next peak, like make some progress, set a short-term goal, like give it 6 months. That's what I mean by short term. So maybe
Yeah,
like your time horizon needs to shift a bit. Um,
absolutely.
and then you just keep like stacking habits and like build on top of that.
I wish we had so much more time. Dude, there's so many gold nuggets here. I wish we could dive in on. I know this is probably not professional podcast etiquette, but I wanted to ask, how much time do you have left?
I can do another 5 minutes ish. Is that cool?
Yeah, that's
And we
cool.
can start to
Okay,
wrap up. Yeah,
we'll wrap up. We're gonna have to definitely do a part two because I feel like there's a lot here we can get into, and I just want to table that for a different day. But
for sure.
you mentioned the two types of people that you've seen: the ones that never get started, and then the ones that have gotten started, but they I like the analogy. They're like a dog digging, and they want someone to clean up the mess behind them, and they can sort of get the shiny object syndrome and focus on a bunch of different things. That resonates with me. That's the camp I find myself in. Is I look at so many different things and I want to do all of them. And when I do all of these things, I'm actually saying no to doing one very well. And when I look up a year or two from now, I may be like barely any good at like five things. Whereas if I were to just focus on what matters most and figure out what that is and spend the majority of my effort and time honing that skill, again, spending a short term time frame, like 6 months, like you said, and really diving in deep into something and making sure it's targeted, I would go further. So I want to end landing the plane on a personal note. So I'll pick your brain later on about the business stuff because we're just gonna have to bookmark right here, man. There's so much to get into. But I wanted to ask you if you'd be willing to share in all of the work that you've done, what's been the biggest failure that you've made and what did you learn from it?
Really early on, when I was still doing my business number one, sports psychology, I really struggled with sales. Um, I'm very much an overthinker, over explainer. I want to give you all the information up front. And it's not a great fit for a sales call. And so when I got a sale, I really wanted to hang on to it. So pros and cons, but lots of lessons to be learned there alone. I had one potential client that booked me for like a leadership workshop for a collegiate football team, and um, the coach recommended a date and time, which was difficult for me because it was on a Sunday. It also happened to be a weekend that I was not. I prefer not to work weekends anyway because I'm with friends or family. But
Right.
B, we were traveling out of state to visit extended family. So I had to come back early to make this time. And the day of, it got canceled because, and the reasoning was it was a bad time. I was like, you
Great answer.
suggested the time. Um, so I was a little frustrated and I emailed back just expressing my frustration. I didn't even like yell at the guy. I just said, I'm disappointed. I think that's literally the extent of it. I was disappointed and um, I don't know exactly what happened, but the guy snapped back and was, called me extremely unprofessional, blah, blah, all these things. So all the work I put into, I mean, the workshop was like ready to deliver. I did all the work up front, hadn't invoiced or anything yet, and it just got canceled. I just let it go. So I completely lost just so many hours of time in my life, and not just on working on something, but also like personally, like with friends and family. We were visiting, my in-laws' grandparents. So it didn't sit well with me. But what I learned from that was I made a new rule for myself, which is, especially professionally speaking, I just the rule for me was nothing negative in writing ever. Period. If you have like some sort of conflict, something that you need to say, then like talk about it verbally, whatever, but or just request that you have a conversation. I communicate much better one-to-one or on a call anyway.
Yeah,
So it was recognizing that, strength or weakness, whatever you want to look at it, in myself. And yeah, I learned you can you can lose a client real easy with if you're not paying attention to those kinds of things.
absolutely you can. It's also great marriage advice. Don't have arguments, don't have discussions via text. Talk to your spouse in person. I would recommend it's much better so that no one reads
Tone.
into tone. Yes, because people half the battle in an argument or a discussion is not what you're saying, it's how you're saying it. And I've noticed, I've seen some of my guy friends,
Bingo.
they've made great points. I've had guy friends make great points, but they made their great points in the wrong tone, and it landed on deaf ears because their wife, their girlfriend, didn't want to hear what they had to say when they were coming at them sideways. Anyhow, there's a lot of nuggets there, man. I wish we had more time. Again, we'll have to schedule a part two. Before we go, was there anything that you hoped or wished I would have asked you that I didn't this time?
I've listened to your other episodes and I still like didn't. I know that question's coming. Honestly, I think we could dig into the fine. Like, it's probably not even as relevant for my like me, my business, and clients, and the kind of work I do. But I love the practical stuff. And to me, when you're a solopreneur, business finance and personal finance are almost the same thing. I wore the CFO hat at the last startup I was in, and I just think like some finance basics 101, like I could I geek out on some of that stuff. I probably am not. I don't go as deep as you might in the personal finance world, but I've had some principles that I've lived by that really, I think, gave me opportunities that I know for a fact other people missed out on because they didn't follow those principles.
Yep. Well, I've taken note, and next time we connect, we may have to do multiple iterations depending on what you're willing to give me time wise. But I'll make sure to ask about that next time because we don't have time to get into it today. But I love it. Business finance, when you're a solopreneur, is roughly the same as personal finance because you're a business of one. And how you govern yourself will more likely be how you govern your business, and then vice versa. So I love that analogy. I wish I would have gotten to some of this content early on so we could have dug into it, but we'll have to do a part two. So I'll let you get to your lunch. I know it's 1 p.m. your time. Thanks again for joining, man. I've been looking forward to having you on for some time now because we've been online buddies for I think 2 months now, roughly. So thank you again. I've enjoyed it. We'll have to schedule a part two. I'll let you get to your day, but thanks for coming on, Riley. I'll see you next time.
Thanks, Jordan. Appreciate it.
That's it for today's show. Thanks for listening, everyone. If you listened this far, you're the real MVP. If you like this episode, please drop us a 5-star review. For every 5-star review I receive, I'll give my dogs a treat. I swear. Lastly, be sure to follow me on Twitter at The Good Steward. That's THA Good Steward. And if you'd like to nominate someone to be interviewed on this podcast, please send me an email. My email is jcgarciamoney@gmail.com. Until next time, everyone, see you later.